In a quiet Midwestern suburb lined with oak trees and decades-old Victorian homes, a 74-year-old retired elementary school teacher was about to discover the ultimate betrayal from those she trusted most. What started as a routine call to check on her mail from her hospital bed took a shocking turn when she came face to face with the systematic dismantling of her entire life. Margaret Maggie Halberg wasn't your typical grandmother. For 45 years, she had spent her life nurturing her garden, teaching neighborhood children, and maintaining the family home where she had nursed her late husband through his final days, known for her sharp wit and fierce independence that belied her fragile appearance. When she encountered a stranger's voice answering her home phone, cheerfully identifying themselves as a realtor, she had no idea she was uncovering a carefully orchestrated plot to strip away her autonomy. Maggie mustered a strength that would lead to a battle for not just her property, but her very dignity and legacy. What began as a desperate fight to reclaim her house would become a powerful movement for elder rights throughout the community. The small town of Mapleton would never be the same after an underestimated widow showed that the most dangerous mistake someone can make is believing the elderly have nothing left to fight for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hospital room had taken on that peculiar late afternoon quality, neither day nor evening, just a suspended moment where shadows stretched long across linoleum floors. Maggie Halberg shifted against starched sheets, wincing as the movement triggered a deep, rattling cough. 3 weeks in this bed had left her body weaker than she cared to admit, but her mind remained sharp as ever. Through the narrow window, she could see the oak trees beginning to bud. April in Illinois meant it was time to start her tomato seedlings. If she wasn't stuck in this hospital bed with pneumonia, she'd be in her sunroom right now, fingers deep in potting soil, Mozart, playing on the old record player Thomas had left her. "Mrs. Halberg, you're looking pensive today." Jenny Tran appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Maggie smiled at the young nurse who'd become something of a bright spot in her dreary days here. "Just thinking about my garden. The tomatoes won't plant themselves." "You'll be back to your gardening before you know it," Jenny said, checking Maggie's IV. "Your oxygen levels are improving. Dr. Sanderson mentioned you might be able to go home next week if things keep trending this way." Home. The word settled in Maggie's chest with both comfort and unease. She'd been away too long already. 3 weeks of mail piling up, the plants needing water, bills to pay. "Jenny, I was wondering, could I borrow your phone? Just for a quick call home. I need to check if my neighbor Ruth has been bringing in the mail like I asked." Jenny hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Just make it quick, okay? I'm not supposed to." "Our secret," Maggie assured her, taking the sleek smartphone that felt foreign in her arthritic hands. She carefully dialed the landline number she'd had for 45 years, each digit as familiar as her own reflection. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered, a voice Maggie didn't recognize. "Hello, Rosewood Realty. Diane speaking." Maggie froze, certain she'd dialed wrong. "I'm sorry, I must have the wrong number. I was trying to reach the Halberg residence." A bright laugh came through the line. "Oh, you've reached 412 Maple Street. The Halberg property. Are you calling about the showing?" The room suddenly felt colder. Maggie's fingers tightened around the phone. "This is Margaret Halberg. I'm calling my home." A brief pause. "Oh, Mrs. Halberg. Yes, Camilla mentioned you might call. We're just preparing the house for tomorrow's open house. Everything's coming together beautifully. We've staged the living room and kitchen already, and the response to the online listing has been fantastic. Once we have your final signature on the closing papers, we can—" "What are you talking about?" Maggie's voice came out sharper than intended, cutting through the cheerful chatter. "What listing? What papers?" Another pause, longer this time. "The The house listing? Your daughter-in-law said everything was arranged under the power of attorney. The property went live on our website 3 days ago. The room swayed around Maggie, a sudden vertigo that had nothing to do with her illness. There must be some mistake. I never signed anything. I never agreed to sell my home. Jenny had been organizing medication at the small table nearby, but her hands had stilled, her attention caught by the rising distress in Maggie's voice. Well, I'm not privy to all the details, of course. The realtor backpedaled, her voice losing its sales pitch brightness. But Mrs. Camilla Halberg has been handling everything. She said you were unable to manage your affairs while recovering. Perhaps you should speak with her directly? Yes, Maggie said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Perhaps I should. The call ended and Maggie sat motionless, the phone heavy in her lap. Jenny approached cautiously, concern etched across her young face. Mrs. Halberg? Is everything all right? They're selling my house, Maggie whispered, the words barely making it past the tightness in her throat. My daughter-in-law is selling my house while I'm lying here. Jenny gently took back her phone, then sat on the edge of the bed. I don't understand. How could they do that without your permission? Power of attorney, she said. Maggie's hands trembled as she reached for the water glass on her tray table. But I never signed anything like that. Not for Camilla. Never for Camilla. Jenny's brow furrowed. When was the last time your daughter-in-law visited you here? Maggie tried to think through the fog of betrayal clouding her thoughts. Last week, I think. Thursday? I was still pretty heavily medicated then. The infection was at its worst. She remembered Camilla's perfectly manicured nails, the clipboard she'd brought, the way she'd leaned over the bed and asked Maggie to sign something about making things easier. While she recovered, I need to call Kevin. My son. Maggie's fingers moved toward the phone again, but they shook too badly to dial. Jenny took the phone and entered the number as Maggie dictated it. The call went straight to voicemail. Kevin, it's your mother, Maggie said after the beep, struggling to keep her voice steady. I just found out Camilla is selling the house. My house. Please call me back immediately. This is... She faltered, searching for words that could possibly convey the magnitude of what was happening. This is wrong, Kevin. Call me. After Jenny had taken back her phone and left to continue her rounds, promising to return soon, Maggie sat alone in the deepening shadows of her hospital room. Outside, a soft spring rain had started, pattering against the window like impatient fingers. The house on Maple Street had been her home for 45 years. She and Thomas had raised Kevin there, planted every tree in the yard, celebrated anniversaries and birthdays within those walls. Thomas had died there 7 years ago in their bedroom holding her hand. And now Camilla, who had always eyed the old Victorian with barely concealed disdain, who had called it outdated and too much house for one old woman, was selling it out from under her. The door opened again, and Camilla herself appeared, as if Maggie's thoughts had conjured her. Impeccably dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit, not a blonde hair out of place, she carried a small gift bag and wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Maggie, you're looking better today. She approached the bed, setting the bag on the side table. I brought you some of those lavender soaps you like. Cut the act, Camilla, Maggie said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. I just spoke to a realtor who answered my home phone. My home phone. Camilla's smile faltered only briefly. Oh, you called the house? I'm sorry about the confusion. Yes, we've started the process of downsizing for you, remember? We discussed how that big old house is too much for you to handle alone. We never discussed anything of the sort, Maggie said, and I never signed a power of attorney. Camilla sighed, taking a seat beside the bed with practiced patience. Maggie, you were very ill. The doctors weren't sure if you'd... Well, decisions had to be made. Kevin and I are only trying to help. A small condo will be much more manageable for you. No stairs, no yard to maintain. I love my stairs. I love my yard. Maggie felt something burning behind her eyes that wasn't fever. Where's Kevin? Why isn't he here to tell me this himself? He's swamped at work. You know how it is with these deadlines. Camilla waved a manicured hand dismissively. But we're both in agreement that this is best for everyone. The market is hot right now, and your house will fetch a premium that can secure your future care. My future care, Maggie repeated, the words bitter in her mouth. You mean my future imprisonment in whatever facility you've already picked out for me? Camilla's expression hardened. That's unfair, Maggie. We're thinking of your safety and comfort. Get out, Maggie said quietly. Get out of my room right now. For a moment, something dark and ugly flashed across Camilla's perfect features before she composed herself. You're upset. That's understandable. We can discuss this when you're feeling more rational. She stood, smoothing her slacks. Rest well, Maggie. After Camilla left, Maggie stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles until her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. The rain fell harder outside, obscuring the budding trees, the world beyond the glass turning hazy and indistinct. Jenny returned as promised, her shift nearly over, concern evident in her tired eyes. She took one look at Maggie and sat beside her. Your daughter-in-law came by. It wasn't a question. Maggie nodded. She claims we discussed selling my house. We never did. She's lying, Jenny. She's always wanted that house gone. Jenny was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. Mrs. Halberg, when I was in nursing school, we had a unit on elder law. Power of attorney documents need to be notarized. There are protocols. If you didn't knowingly sign anything, then what she's doing might be illegal, Maggie finished, a flicker of hope kindling in her chest. Jenny nodded. I could look into it for you. Find out what your rights are. See what was actually filed and by whom. Maggie reached for the young nurse's hand, gripping it with surprising strength. Would you? I don't have anyone else right now. Ruth, my neighbor, she'd help. But she's not exactly tech-savvy when it comes to legal documents. I'll help, Jenny promised, squeezing Maggie's hand. Tomorrow morning, I'll come in early before my shift. We'll figure out what documents were signed and who signed them. After Jenny left, Maggie watched night fall outside her window. The same darkness had settled over the home she might never return to. The house where Thomas had carried her over the threshold in 1959. Where Kevin had taken his first steps. Where she'd planted 45 years of memories, as deep-rooted as the oak trees in her yard. They won't take it, she whispered to the empty room, clutching her blanket like armor. Not my home, not while I'm still breathing. But even as the words left her lips, Maggie felt the weight of what she was up against. She was just one old woman, weakened by illness, facing down. Her son's wife, who had the paperwork, the connections, and apparently the law on her side. The call had changed everything. Now Maggie had to find the strength to fight back, before the house that held her entire life was sold right out from under her. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds in thin, determined stripes, painting Maggie's blanket with pale gold. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Camilla standing in her kitchen, directing strangers through her home, pointing out where built-ins could be removed, walls knocked down. The door opened, and Jenny appeared, dressed in street clothes with her nurse's uniform folded over her arm. She carried a small laptop and wore the determined expression of someone who'd arrived with a purpose. You came, Maggie said, surprise evident in her voice despite Jenny's promise the night before. Of course I did. Jenny set her things down and pulled a chair close to Maggie's bed. I have an hour before my shift starts. How are you feeling? Like I've been robbed without anyone breaking in, Maggie replied, shifting to sit more upright. The movement triggered a coughing fit that left her breathless. Jenny poured a cup of water and waited for the coughing to subside. I did some research last night. Power of attorney documents need to be properly executed to be valid. That means your signature, a notary's seal, and specific language about what powers you're granting. She opened her laptop and turned it toward Maggie. I pulled up the visitor logs from when you were first admitted. Your daughter-in-law visited 6 times in the first week, twice when you were heavily sedated. Maggie stared at the screen, at the neat rows of dates and times. She was here, but I don't remember most of those visits. I was in and out on the ventilator. That's what I thought. Jenny's voice was quiet but firm. Now, let's check the county records. Property transactions and legal documents are public record. Her fingers moved efficiently over the keyboard. Maggie watched, feeling both helpless and grateful as this young woman, practically a stranger, fought for her with more determination than her own family had shown. Here, Jenny said finally, turning the screen again. A limited power of attorney was filed 3 days after you were admitted. It grants Camilla authority to make financial and property decisions on your behalf while you're incapacitated. Maggie squinted at the document, her reading glasses somewhere back at her house. That's not my signature, she said flatly, studying the wavering line at the bottom of the page. It's not even close. Jenny zoomed in on the signature. It looks attempted, like someone trying to copy your handwriting. Or like someone guiding my hand when I was sedated, Maggie said, the realization striking her like a physical blow. She remembered suddenly Camilla leaning over her bed, something about just a formality and making things easier. A pen in her limp fingers. Jenny's expression darkened. That would be elder abuse and fraud. The word hung in the air between them. Fraud. A criminal act committed by family, by her son's wife, possibly with Kevin's knowledge. The betrayal cut deeper than Maggie had imagined possible. There's more, Jenny said, scrolling further. Your house was officially listed 3 days ago. There's an open house scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Maggie felt her chest constrict in a way that had nothing to do with her pneumonia. Strangers would be walking through her home tomorrow, peering into her closets, judging the wallpaper she'd chosen decades ago, planning where their own furniture would go. Can we stop it? She asked. Maybe, but we need help. Jenny closed her laptop. You mentioned a neighbor, Ruth? Ruth Gallagher. We've lived next door to each other for 40 years. She has a spare key, checks on things when I'm away. Call her, Jenny urged. If she can document who's coming and going from your house, that's evidence. And you need a lawyer, someone who specializes in elder law. Maggie nodded. Determination. Replacing the shock that had paralyzed her initially. Ruth will help. She and Camilla have never gotten along. Ruth sees right through her perfect facade. Jenny glanced at her watch. My shift starts soon, but I can help you make these calls. First. They called Ruth first. The phone rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. Ruth Gallagher, who's calling? Ruth, it's Maggie. I'm calling from the hospital. Maggie! Ruth's voice immediately warmed. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. It's good to hear your voice. They've kept me away, saying you were too sick for visitors. That daughter-in-law of yours has been prancing around like she owns the place. She's trying to, Maggie said grimly. Ruth, they're selling my house. There's an open house tomorrow. A string of colorful expletives followed, making Jenny's eyebrows rise in surprise. The hell they are, Ruth finally concluded. Over my dead body, which is a damn sight more likely than yours at this rate. You sound 10 times better than that woman made you out to be. I need your help, Maggie said. I need you to be my eyes and ears. Document everything. Who comes to the house, what they're doing. Use your phone to take pictures if you can. Count on it, Ruth said fiercely. That witch won't know what hit her. And Maggie? I've still got those recordings on my answering machine from when you were helping me with my will last month. The ones where you specifically said you'd never leave that house until they carried you out feet first. Maggie felt a surge of hope. Ruth, those recordings could prove I had no intention of selling. Damn right they will. I'll keep them. Safe. Ruth paused. Have you talked to Kevin about this? He won't answer my calls, Maggie said, the hurt evident in her voice. That boy always did hide when things got difficult, Ruth muttered. Just like his father, God rest his soul. After finishing with Ruth, Jenny helped Maggie call the hospital's patient advocate, who promised to send a social worker to discuss her rights and the validity of medical decisions made while she was sedated. One more call, Jenny said, pulling up a search on her phone. Here's an attorney who specializes in elder law and estate issues, Michael Reyes. He has excellent reviews, and his office is here in town. They left a message with the attorney's office, and Jenny reluctantly prepared to start her shift. I'll check on you between rounds, she promised, gathering her things. Jenny, Maggie called as the young nurse reached the door. Why are you helping me? You barely know me. Jenny paused, her expression softening. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. When she got sick, her sister tried something similar, not as brazen as selling her house, but redirecting her pension, changing bank accounts. She shrugged, a simple gesture that carried the weight of old pain. No one helped us then. I wish someone had. After Jenny left, Maggie lay back against her pillows, exhausted but more focused than she'd felt since waking in this hospital bed weeks ago. The initial shock was giving way to something harder, something with edges sharp enough to cut. Her phone rang, the hospital room phone this time. It was Kevin, finally returning her call. Mom, are you okay? Your message sounded upset. Am I okay? Maggie repeated, disbelief coloring her voice. Your wife is selling my house, Kevin. My home. Using a power of attorney I never knowingly signed. A long pause followed. Too long. It's for the best, Mom, he finally said, his voice small and unconvincing. The doctors weren't sure you'd recover at first. We had to make plans. Plans to steal my home? The hurt in her voice was raw, unchecked. Did you know about this? Kevin? Did you help her forge my signature? No one forged anything, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. You signed the papers. Camilla said you understood what was happening. I was sedated, Kevin, on a ventilator. I couldn't have understood anything. Another long silence stretched between them, filled with 30 years of avoided confrontations, of Kevin stepping back whenever standing up was required. Mom, please, he finally said. This doesn't have to be so dramatic. The condo they've found for you is really nice. One level, a small garden area. Stop. Maggie's voice was quiet but firm. I don't want to hear about some condo. I want to know why my son is letting his wife sell the home I've lived in for 45 years without my consent. It's not like that, Kevin protested weakly. Then, what is it like, Kevin? Explain it to me. But he couldn't, or wouldn't. After more weak protests and vague assurances that everything would work out, he ended the call, promising to visit soon, a promise Maggie knew he wouldn't keep. Outside her window, clouds had gathered, darkening the morning light. Maggie watched them build, feeling a similar storm gathering within her. The initial shock and hurt were crystallizing into something else. Resolve. They thought she was just a sick old woman they could push aside. They had miscalculated badly. Her phone rang again, the attorney's office returning her call. As Maggie answered, she felt the first raindrops hit her window, but the storm brewing inside her was far more powerful than any weather. The storm had passed by evening, leaving the world outside Maggie's window slick and glistening. Her conversation with Michael Reyes had been brief but reassuring. He would stop by the hospital tomorrow morning to discuss her case and review the power of attorney document. Your call came at the right time, the attorney had told her, his voice carrying the steady confidence of someone used to navigating troubled waters. We have a 48-hour window to challenge these documents before they become much harder to invalidate. Now, as visiting hours wound down, Maggie sat propped against her pillows, watching the clock. Ruth had promised to call with an update after monitoring the house all afternoon. The wait was excruciating. When the phone finally rang, Maggie snatched it up before the first ring completed. "Ruth?" "You better believe it," came the familiar, gravelly voice. "Maggie? It's worse than we thought. That daughter-in-law of yours hasn't just listed the house. She's emptying it." Maggie's hand tightened around the receiver. "What do you mean, emptying it?" "I mean there's been a parade of people in and out all day. Not just the realtor. There was a woman from an estate sale company taking inventory. 2 men with a furniture truck took away what looked like your dining room set. The one Thomas refinished. Himself. The dining room set. Solid oak, with the chair where Thomas had carved their initials underneath the seat on their 10th anniversary. The table where Kevin had done his homework, where they'd eaten Sunday dinners for decades. "She can't do that," Maggie whispered, though she wasn't sure anymore what Camilla could or couldn't do with that forged document in her hand. "It gets worse," Ruth continued. "I confronted her." "You did what?" "Walked right over there when I saw them loading up Thomas's brake front. Told her I knew exactly what she was doing and that you hadn't agreed to any of it. You should have seen her face, Maggie. Like a cat caught with feathers in its teeth." Despite everything, Maggie felt a small smile tug at her lips. Ruth had never been one to back down from a fight, even at 78. "What did she say?" "Fed me some garbage about how you and she had discussed this months ago, how the transition would be easier if everything was taken care of before you came home. I told her I had recordings that proved otherwise, and she got real interested in that." "Recordings? Remember when you helped me with my will last month? Your phone kept ringing. It was Camilla trying to convince you to downsize. You told me, and I quote, 'I'll leave that house when they carry me out feet first, just like Thomas did.'" Maggie remembered the conversation clearly. She'd been emphatic about her desire to stay in her home, annoyed by Camilla's persistent suggestions that she move into a more suitable living arrangement. "Ruth, those recordings could be vital evidence. Already ahead of you. I've got 'em safe, and that lawyer you're meeting tomorrow is welcome to them." A nurse appeared in Maggie's doorway, tapping her watch to indicate visiting hours were ending. "I have to go, Ruth, but thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet," Ruth replied. "We're just getting started." Her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "By the way, I signed up for the open house tomorrow. Thought I'd take a tour of the place, ask some very pointed questions about the selling process. Might even mention elder abuse laws in front of the potential buyers." After saying goodbye, Maggie leaned back, processing everything Ruth had told her. Camilla wasn't just selling the house. She was liquidating Maggie's entire life, piece by piece. The family heirlooms, the furniture, the collections of memories accumulated over decades. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Jenny enter until the young nurse was standing beside her bed. "You look like you've had some news," Jenny observed, checking Maggie's vitals with practiced efficiency. "My neighbor Ruth called. Camilla is selling off my furniture before the house even closes. My husband's dining set is already gone." Jenny's hands stilled on the blood pressure cuff. That's theft, Mrs. Halberg. Even with a POA, she can't just liquidate your personal property without your explicit consent." "The attorney is coming tomorrow morning," Maggie said, "and the hospital social worker is supposed to visit too." "Good." Jenny made a note on Maggie's chart. "Your oxygen levels are almost normal. Dr. Sanderson mentioned you might be discharged in 3 days if you continue improving." 3 days. Maggie stared out the window at the darkening sky. Will I even have a home to go back to? The question hung in the air, neither of them having an answer. Morning brought attorney Michael Reyes, a thoughtful-looking man in his early 40s with kind eyes and a demeanor that radiated calm competence. He set his briefcase on the small table beside Maggie's bed and took a seat. Mrs. Halberg, I've reviewed the documents your nurse friend helped access. There are several concerning elements here. He pulled out copies of the power of attorney paperwork. This document grants your daughter-in-law broad powers to make financial and property decisions on your behalf. The problem is, it appears to have been executed while you were heavily sedated, according to your medical records. I have no memory of signing it, Maggie confirmed, and that's not my normal signature. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Michael nodded. I suspected as much. There's a notary signature here, but I've already verified that the notary never saw you sign. She notarized it based on your daughter-in-law's assurance that you had signed it willingly. Is that legal? No. It's notary fraud, and it invalidates the document. He leaned forward. Mrs. Halberg, based on what I've seen, we have grounds to file for an emergency injunction to halt the sale of your home and freeze any further disposal of your assets. For the first time since discovering Camilla's betrayal, Maggie felt something loosen in her chest, the first tentative unfurling of hope. What do we need to do? I've already started preparing the paperwork. We'll file with the court today. He hesitated. There's something else you should know. Your son's name appears on some of these documents as a witness to your signature. The brief flutter of hope withered. Kevin had known, had participated, had watched his wife dismantle his mother's life and said nothing. I see, she said quietly. Mrs. Halberg, Maggie, I know this is difficult, but the law is on your side here. What they've done is clearly fraudulent, possibly criminal. We just need to act quickly. The meeting with the hospital social worker that afternoon reinforced Michael's assessment. Ms. Delgado, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense manner, reviewed Maggie's case notes with growing concern. Your medical records clearly indicate you were not competent to sign legal documents when this POA was executed, she stated, her pen tapping against her clipboard. I'm adding a note to your file documenting cognitive clarity now, which will help establish that you understand the implications of revoking the power of attorney. Will that be enough to stop the sale? Maggie asked. Combined with your attorney's injunction request, it should create enough legal obstacles to at least pause everything until a judge can review the case. She fixed Maggie with a direct look. But you need to be prepared for a fight. Family conflicts over property and care decisions can get ugly fast. It's already ugly, Maggie replied, thinking of her dining room set being loaded onto a truck, of her home being shown to strangers of her son's betrayal. By late afternoon, Michael had filed the emergency injunction, and Maggie had signed a formal revocation of the power of attorney with Ms. Delgado witnessing her signature. A nurse had wheeled her down to the hospital chapel for the signing. Neutral. Ground where no one could claim she had been coerced. Ruth called again as the sun was setting, painting Maggie's room in shades of amber and gold. The open house was something else, she began without preamble. I counted 22 people. Coming through, Camilla was there the whole time with that realtor, talking about motivated sellers and quick closings. Did you say anything? Maggie asked. Did I ever? Ruth cackled. Waited until there was a nice group of potential buyers gathered. In the living room, then asked real loud if they knew the house was being sold through a fraudulent power of attorney, while the actual owner was in the hospital with pneumonia. Despite everything, Maggie found herself laughing, a rusty sound that triggered a small coughing fit. Ruth, you didn't. I absolutely did. You should have seen them scatter. That realtor looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole, and Camilla. Ruth's voice dropped to a gleeful whisper. Camilla tried to pull me aside, Told me I was interfering with a legitimate sale. I told her the only thing legitimate about this situation was the jail time she'd be facing for elder fraud. After Ruth's call, the room felt less oppressive, as if her friend's fierce loyalty had restored some of what Camilla had stolen from her. Maggie watched the last light fade from the sky, her mind clearer than it had been since this ordeal began. Tomorrow she would speak with Dr. Sanderson about expediting her discharge. Tomorrow the court would review Michael's injunction request. Tomorrow she would begin the fight to reclaim what was hers. But for now, she closed her eyes, picturing her home as it had been, warm with memories, filled with the collected treasures of a life well lived. Thomas's armchair by the window, the garden waiting for her hands, the oak trees that had watched over their family for nearly half a century. "I'm coming home," she whispered to the darkened room, "whether they like it or not." The taxi pulled, up to 412 Maple Street, under a perfect blue sky that seemed to mock the turmoil in Maggie's heart. 4 days had passed since she'd discovered Camilla's betrayal. 4 days of legal maneuvers, hospital discussions, and preparations for this moment. "Are you sure you don't want me to wait?" asked Jenny, who had insisted on accompanying Maggie home after her discharge. She'd taken the afternoon off, stating simply, "Some things are more important than a shift." "I'm sure," Maggie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Ruth is expecting me, and I need to face this alone." The driver unloaded Maggie's small suitcase, all she'd had with her for her hospital stay, and Jenny helped her up the familiar walkway. Each step felt like a reclamation, even as Maggie's eyes fixed on the "for sale" sign planted prominently in her front yard like a foreign flag on conquered soil. The key turned in the lock, and Maggie pushed open the door to a house that simultaneously was and wasn't hers. The entryway was pristine, stripped of the family photos that had once lined the walls. The antique hall tree where Thomas had hung his hat for 40 years was gone, replaced by a sleek modern coat rack. The air smelled wrong, some artificial scent of vanilla and cinnamon rather than the subtle blend of lemon oil, old books, and garden soil that had always been the house's natural perfume. "Oh, Maggie," Jenny breathed, taking in the sterile, staged perfection of what had clearly once been a warm, lived-in home. Maggie said nothing, moving through the space like a ghost, noting each absence. The living room had been neutralized, as realtors called it, her floral sofa replaced with something beige and angular, the family photos removed from the mantel, Thomas's book collection cleared from the built-in shelves to make the space look larger. In the dining room, the absence of her table and chairs left a hollowness that seemed to echo. She ran a hand over the bare wall where her collection of antique plates had hung, gifts from Thomas, one for each anniversary. "Would you like me to make some tea?" Jenny asked gently, clearly unsure what to do in the face of Maggie's silent inventory of losses. "That would be nice," Maggie murmured, continuing her survey. "If they've left the kettle." The kitchen, at least, retained most of its fixtures, though it too had been staged with artful bowls of fruit and a cookbook left casually open on the counter, as if Maggie had just stepped away mid-recipe. The copper-bottomed pots that had hung from the ceiling rack for decades were gone, replaced with shiny new ones that had never cooked a family meal. As Jenny filled the kettle, still there, thankfully, a sharp knock came at the back door. Ruth's face appeared through the glass pane, her expression brightening when she saw Maggie. "You're home!" she exclaimed, bustling in and engulfing Maggie in a fierce hug that smelled of gardenia perfume and cigarettes. "Thank God. This place needs you." "It doesn't look like it needs me at all," Maggie replied, gesturing to the impersonal, magazine-ready styling that had been imposed on her kitchen. "Hogwash. It's been like a body without a soul." Ruth settled at the kitchen table, which, at least, was still Maggie's original. "The good news is I've documented everything they've taken, made a list, took pictures. Your lawyer says it'll all help with the case." Jenny set mugs of tea before each of them. "The attorney filed the emergency injunction, right?" Has there been any response from the court? Michael called this morning, Maggie confirmed. The judge granted a temporary halt on the sale pending a hearing, but Camilla hasn't been served with the papers yet. As if summoned by her name, the sound of a key in the front door echoed through the house. All three women froze, exchanging glances. Heavy footsteps crossed the foyer, accompanied by the click of high heels on hardwood. "I'm telling you, it's the perfect solution," came Camilla's voice, sharp with impatience. "We move the closing up, get the paperwork finished before she's released, and present it as a fait accompli. Her signature on the POA gives us the—" She stopped abruptly in the kitchen doorway, Kevin a step behind her. For a moment, the tableau held, Camilla and Kevin staring in shock at Maggie, Ruth, and Jenny seated around the kitchen table with their tea, as ordinary as if it were any afternoon social call. Maggie. Camilla recovered first, her surprise masked quickly behind a polished smile. "You're home! We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. The hospital should have called us to pick you up." "I made my own arrangements," Maggie replied, her voice cool but steady. "As you can see." Kevin hovered awkwardly in the doorway, unable to meet his mother's eyes. "Mom, you look better." "No thanks to either of you," Ruth muttered into her teacup. Camilla's smile tightened. "Perhaps we should speak privately, Maggie. Family matters and all that." Her pointed glance at Jenny and Ruth made it clear who she considered interlopers. "Jenny and Ruth are exactly where they should be," Maggie said firmly. "I, however, am wondering why you have a key to my house when I never gave you one." "We had it made for the realtor," Camilla replied smoothly, setting her designer handbag on the counter. "For the showings, everything has been going so well, Maggie. We've already had 2 offers over asking price." "How fortunate," Maggie said, her voice dripping with sarcasm that seemed to sail right past Camilla. "It is, and the condo we found for you is just charming. 1 floor, a small garden plot, much more manageable at your age." "At my age," Maggie repeated, her hands tightening around her teacup. "Funny how my age didn't seem to matter when I was tending 2 acres of garden by myself last summer, or when I replaced the porch railing in the fall, or when I filed my own taxes in February." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we're just trying to help. After you got so sick." "After I got sick, you and your wife decided to steal my home out from under me," Maggie finished for him, "using a power of attorney I never consciously signed." "That's absurd," Camilla interjected, but a flicker of unease crossed her perfect features. "You signed the paperwork. We discussed it." "When?" Maggie challenged. "When exactly did we have this discussion, Camilla? Was it when I was sedated and on a ventilator? Was it when the doctors had told you I might not make it, and you saw your opportunity?" "You're being dramatic," Camilla said dismissively. "Kevin, tell her how irrational she's being." But Kevin remained silent, his gaze fixed on the kitchen floor as if the answers to life's questions might be found in the hexagonal tiles his mother had laid herself 20 years ago. "The court has issued a temporary halt on the sale of this house," Maggie stated, her voice gaining strength with each word. "My attorney has filed to invalidate the power of attorney as fraudulently obtained, and you, Camilla, will return the items you've removed from my home." "What?" Camilla's composure cracked slightly. "What court? What attorney?" "Michael Reyes," Jenny supplied helpfully. "He specializes in elder law and financial abuse cases." Camilla's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, Maggie. That POA was perfectly legal." "The notary never saw me sign it," Maggie countered. "That alone makes it invalid. But we've also established that I was heavily sedated when you claim I signed it. That's fraud, Camilla. Possibly criminal fraud." "Kevin," Camilla turned to her husband, voice sharp with command. "Tell your mother this is a misunderstanding. Tell her we're acting in her best interest." But Kevin remained frozen, his expression caught between guilt and fear. The silence stretched uncomfortably until the sound of the front door opening again interrupted the standoff. "Hello? Mom? Dad?" A teenage girl's voice called from the entryway. The front door was open. Abigail appeared in the kitchen doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes widening as she took in the tense scene. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, dropping her bag and rushing to Maggie. "You're home! They said you were still really sick." Maggie embraced her granddaughter, feeling the girl's genuine delight at seeing her. "I'm much better, Abby. Still recovering, but well enough to come home." Abby pulled back, surveying the kitchen with a frown. "What happened to all your stuff? Where are the copper pots? And the plates in the dining room?" "Your mother has been redecorating," Maggie said carefully, not wanting to put the girl in the middle of the conflict. But Abby was 16, not 6, and her sharp eyes moved from her grandmother to her parents. "Is this about the condo? The one you said Grandma wanted to move to?" She turned back to Maggie. "But you always said you'd never leave this house." "I did say that," Maggie confirmed, meeting Camilla's glare steadily. "Many times." Abby's frown deepened. "Then why did Mom tell the realtor you were excited about downsizing?" She directed this question at Maggie, but it was Camilla who answered. "Abigail, this is an adult conversation. Why don't you go start your homework? We'll discuss this later." "No," Abby said, standing her ground with all the righteous indignation of a teenager detecting injustice. "Grandma loves this house. She'd never want to sell it. What's really going on?" The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin stared at his shoes. Camilla's perfect mask slipped further, revealing the calculation beneath. Ruth wore a barely concealed smile of satisfaction, and Jenny watched it all with the quiet attentiveness of someone documenting important events. "What's going on?" Maggie said finally, her voice gentle but firm. "Is that I'm staying right here, in my home. And we're going to have a long conversation about boundaries, respect, and the difference between helping someone and controlling them." She rose from her chair, standing as tall as her 5'3" frame allowed, strengthened by the justice of her position and the support of those around her. "Now," she continued, looking directly at Camilla, "I believe you have a key that belongs to me." The key Camilla reluctantly surrendered felt like the first small victory in what was shaping up to be a much larger war. In the 3 days since Maggie's return home, the battle lines had been clearly drawn, with the house on Maple Street as contested territory. Camilla and Kevin had departed that first afternoon with thinly veiled threats about discussing this with our attorney and doing what's necessary for your care. Abby had stayed behind, helping Maggie settle back in, her young face troubled by the revelation of what her parents had attempted. Now, seated at her kitchen table with Michael Reyes across from her, Maggie watched as the attorney methodically arranged documents in precise stacks. Ruth sat beside her, a stalwart ally, while Jenny had stopped by on her break, still in her scrubs. "Let's review what we have," Michael said, gesturing to the first stack. The power of attorney document. Itself, clearly problematic. The notary has provided a sworn statement that she never witnessed you sign it, which invalidates it immediately. "Will she get in trouble?" Maggie asked, concerned for the young notary who'd been manipulated by Camilla's smooth assurances. "She's cooperating fully, so the consequences will be minimal," Michael assured her. "Now, these are your medical records from the dates in question." He tapped the second stack. "They clearly show you were heavily sedated and on a ventilator when this document was supposedly signed with your full understanding." Ruth snorted. "Full understanding? The woman couldn't even hold a spoon, let alone comprehend legal documents." Michael nodded. "Exactly. Now, the third element strengthening our case is the evidence of your consistent intention to remain in your home." He looked at Ruth. "You mentioned recordings?" Ruth produced an old-fashioned answering machine. Right here. From when Maggie was helping me update my will last month. We got to talking about our homes, and Camilla had just been pushing that senior living nonsense again. She pressed play, and Maggie's voice emerged, slightly tinny, but unmistakable. I've told Camilla a dozen times. I'm not interested in downsizing. This is my home. I raised my son here. I nursed my husband here. I'll leave that house when they carry me out feet first, just like Thomas did. Michael smiled. Perfect. This clearly establishes your intent just weeks before your hospitalization. Jenny, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. What about the furniture and personal items that were removed? Can we get those back? Absolutely, Michael confirmed. I've drafted a demand letter for the return of all property removed without authorization. If they don't comply, we'll add it to our lawsuit. Maggie winced at the word lawsuit. Suing her own son and daughter-in-law. It still felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. But then she remembered the cool calculation in Camilla's eyes, the way Kevin had avoided looking at her, and her resolve hardened. What's our next step? She asked. We have a court date for the formal hearing on the power of attorney and the injunction against the sale. It's set for next Monday. Michael checked his calendar. That gives us 5 days to gather any additional evidence and prepare your testimony. The doorbell rang, interrupting their strategy session. Ruth went to answer it and returned with Abby, who had taken to visiting her grandmother daily after school. Hi, Grandma, Abby said, kissing Maggie's cheek before noticing the serious gathering. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you had a meeting. It's fine, sweetheart, Maggie assured her. We're just discussing the legal situation with Mr. Reyes. Abby's expression darkened. About what Mom and Dad tried to do? Sell your house while you were sick? Michael exchanged glances with Maggie, who nodded slightly. Yes, Abby. We're building a case to make sure your grandmother's wishes are respected. The teenager set her backpack down with a determined thump. I want to help. Ruth raised an eyebrow. Honey, this is complicated adult stuff. And they're your parents. You shouldn't have to choose sides. I'm not choosing sides, Abby insisted. I'm choosing what's right, and what they did wasn't right. Maggie reached for her granddaughter's hand. Abby, I appreciate your support more than you know. But Ruth is right. This could get messy, and I don't want to put you in a difficult position. I'm already in a difficult position, Abby countered. Dad barely talks anymore, and Mom acts like nothing's wrong, except she's constantly on the phone with realtors and lawyers. She hesitated, then reached into her backpack. That's why I brought this. She pulled out her phone and opened a text conversation. Mom's been texting Dad about the whole thing. I saw these on his phone when he left it charging. I took screenshots. Michael frowned slightly. Abby, accessing someone else's private communications without permission is legally problematic. Dad uses my fingerprint to unlock his phone all the time when his hands are full, Abby explained with the casual air of someone who didn't see an ethical issue. He's never cared before. Despite his reservations, Michael took the phone and scrolled through the screenshots. His expression grew increasingly serious as he read. What is it? Maggie asked, alarmed by his reaction. Messages between your son and daughter-in-law discussing the plan to, and I quote, move quickly before she realizes what's happening, and push her out legally before summer. He continued scrolling. There's also discussion about the estimate they received for the house, significantly above market value, and how they planned to use the proceeds. Let me see that, Ruth demanded, taking the phone. Her face flushed with anger as she read. Those vultures. Listen to this. Once we get the old house sold, we can finally renovate the kitchen and put in that pool Abby's been wanting. Abby's face crumpled. I never asked for a pool. I told Mom I didn't want one if it meant Grandma had to move. Maggie felt an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her recovering pneumonia. The betrayal cut deeper with each new revelation. "There's more," Michael said grimly. "Instructions to the real estate agent to expedite everything while power of attorney is active, and acknowledgement that Maggie might contest things once she's more lucid." "They knew," Maggie whispered. "They knew exactly what they were doing." Michael nodded, his expression somber. "This strengthens our case considerably, though we'll need to address how we obtained these messages." "I'll testify," Abby said firmly. "I'll tell the judge everything I know." Maggie looked at her granddaughter, so young, yet showing more integrity than her parents. "Are you sure, Abby? Your mother won't forgive this easily." "I'm sure." Abby's jaw set in a determined line that reminded Maggie of Thomas. "Grandpa always said doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the easy thing." The meeting concluded with Michael gathering the evidence, including copies of Abby's screenshots. As he was preparing to leave, the phone rang. Maggie answered, to find Kevin on the line, his voice tense. "Mom, we need to talk. Camilla and I have been discussing things with our attorney and—" "Kevin," Maggie interrupted gently. "I have my own attorney now. Any discussions about the house or the power of attorney should go through him." A long pause followed. "This is ridiculous, Mom. We're family. We shouldn't need lawyers to talk to each other." "You brought lawyers into this the moment you and Camilla decided to forge my signature and sell my home," Maggie replied, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. "I'm simply responding in kind." "Nobody forged anything," Kevin insisted, though his protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. "You signed the papers. Maybe you don't remember, but I was intubated and sedated, Kevin. The hospital records prove it. The notary has admitted she never witnessed my signature. Let's not insult each other's intelligence by pretending this was legitimate." Another silence stretched between them, filled with decades of unspoken disappointments. Finally, Kevin sighed. "What do you want, Mom?" "I want my house left alone. I want my belongings returned. And I want an acknowledgement that what you and Camilla tried to do was wrong." "Camilla was just trying to help," Kevin began, falling back on the familiar excuse. "No, she wasn't," Maggie said firmly. "And deep down, you know that." After she hung up, Maggie stood at the kitchen window, looking out at her garden. The tomato seedlings she'd been unable to plant were long past their time now, but the perennials Thomas had lovingly established decades ago were blooming without human intervention. The roses needed pruning, the borders needed weeding, but the garden endured. Like me, Maggie thought, weathered and in need of care, but still standing. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Abby asked, coming to stand beside her. Maggie put her arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. "I'm better than okay. I'm home. I have people who care about me. And for the first time since this all started, I feel like I might actually win this fight." Abby leaned her head against Maggie's shoulder. "You will win. Truth always does, right?" Maggie wished she could share her granddaughter's certainty. In her 74 years, she'd seen truth lose more battles than it won. But looking down at Abby's hopeful face, she nodded. "Right," she agreed. "Truth always finds its way to the surface sooner or later." Later that evening, after everyone had gone, Maggie sat in Thomas's old armchair, one of the few pieces of furniture Camilla hadn't managed to remove, and opened the case file Michael had left for her review. The legal language was dense, the allegations stark: fraud, elder abuse, misappropriation, breach of fiduciary duty. Such cold, formal terms for what was, at its heart, a profound betrayal by the people who should have protected her most. But as she read through the documents, Maggie felt something unexpected: strength. Not the fragile defiance of those first days in the hospital, but something more substantial: the quiet, immovable power of someone who knew she was fighting for what was right. The court date was set, the evidence was mounting, and Maggie Halberg was prepared for battle. The county courthouse stood like a sentinel of justice, its weathered limestone and broad steps speaking to decades of legal conflicts resolved within its walls. Maggie climbed those steps slowly, leaning on a cane. Not out of necessity, but on Jenny's insistence that it would reinforce her image as a vulnerable elder for the proceedings. Michael Reyes walked beside her, briefcase in hand, his calm presence a steadying force. Ruth followed, muttering about vultures and karma under her breath, while Jenny had taken a personal day to attend the hearing, saying simply, "I need to see this through." Inside, the courthouse corridors buzzed with activity, but Maggie noticed only one group, Camilla and Kevin huddled with their attorney, a sharp-featured woman with a sleek bob and an expression of practiced confidence. Abby stood slightly apart from her parents, her young face solemn. When she spotted Maggie, she broke away and hurried over. "Grandma," she whispered, embracing Maggie tightly. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Maggie replied, squeezing her granddaughter's hand. "Are you? It's not too late to change your mind about testifying." Abby shook her head firmly. "I'm doing this. Mom's furious that I'm taking sides. But Dad actually seemed, I don't know, almost relieved when I told them." Michael guided them toward the courtroom. "We should get settled. Judge Harriman is known for starting precisely on time." As they approached, Kevin caught Maggie's eye. For a brief moment, something passed between mother and son, a flicker of shame in his gaze, quickly suppressed as Camilla placed a hand on his arm and whispered something in his ear. Courtroom 3 was austere and formal, with dark wood paneling and the seal of the state of Illinois mounted behind the judge's bench. Maggie settled into her seat at the plaintiff's table, trying to ignore the twisting in her stomach. She had testified in court once before, decades ago, as a witness in a minor traffic accident. This felt infinitely more significant, and infinitely more personal. "All rise," the bailiff intoned as Judge Harriman entered, a distinguished black woman, in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and keen eyes that missed nothing as she surveyed the courtroom. The proceedings began with formalities, case numbers, identifications, preliminary statements. Michael laid out their case in clear, measured terms, describing the fraudulent power of attorney, the unauthorized attempts to sell Maggie's home, and the removal of her personal property. Camilla's attorney, Ms. Winters, countered with a narrative of concerned family members making difficult decisions during a medical crisis, of a son and daughter-in-law attempting to secure appropriate living arrangements for an elderly relative, who could no longer safely maintain a large home. Mrs. Halberg was gravely ill, Ms. Winters emphasized, her voice practiced in its concern. The doctors were not optimistic about her recovery. My clients acted out of love and foresight, attempting to arrange matters before what they believed would be an inevitable decline. Judge Harriman's expression remained neutral, but her questions were pointed. And yet the power of attorney was executed when Mrs. Halberg was heavily sedated, without proper notarization. How do your clients explain that? Ms. Winters faltered. Slightly. There may have been procedural oversights in the moment of crisis, Your Honor. But the intent was proper. Intent doesn't validate an improperly executed legal document, the judge observed dryly. Let's hear from Mrs. Halberg herself. Maggie took the stand, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom upon her. Michael guided her through her testimony with gentle questions that allowed her to tell her story, the pneumonia, the hospitalization, the shocking discovery that her home was being sold without her knowledge or consent. "And did you at any point grant your daughter-in-law authority to sell your home?" Michael asked. "Never," Maggie stated firmly. "We had discussed senior living options before, or rather, Camilla had brought them up repeatedly, and I had repeatedly declined. I've been clear and consistent about my wishes to remain in my home." When Ms. Winters cross-examined her, the questions grew more pointed. "Mrs. Halberg, given your recent serious illness, wouldn't you agree that living alone in a Two-story home with extensive gardens presents significant safety concerns? No more than it did before I got pneumonia, Maggie replied evenly. I've lived there alone for 7 years since my husband passed. I've maintained the house and myself quite well. And what about the next time you fall ill? Or if you fall and break a hip, who will care for you then? Michael rose. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is speculating about hypothetical future events that could happen to anyone, not addressing the legal issues at hand. Sustained, Judge Harriman agreed. Ms. Winters, please confine your questions to the matter before the court, namely, the validity of the power of attorney and the actions taken under its authority. Ruth testified next, her customary bluntness on full display as she described the furniture removal, the open house, and her confrontation with Camilla. She played the answering machine recording of Maggie clearly stating her intention to remain in her home until they carry me out feet first. Jenny's testimony focused on Maggie's medical condition during the days when the power of attorney was supposedly signed, providing professional context to the medical records already submitted as evidence. Based on the medication Mrs. Halberg was receiving and her level of sedation, she would have been incapable of comprehending legal documents, let alone signing them with informed consent, Jenny explained, her quiet professionalism lending weight to her words. Then came the moment Maggie had been dreading, Abby's testimony. The 16-year-old took the stand with remarkable composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap. Abigail, Michael began gently, can you tell the court about conversations you've heard regarding your grandmother's house? Abby nodded, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. Mom has been talking about selling Grandma's house for at least a year. She always said it was wasted space and that the property values in that neighborhood were peaking. Did you ever hear discussions about waiting until your grandmother was unable to object? Yes, Abby confirmed, not looking at her parents. When Grandma got really sick, I heard Mom tell Dad that this was their opportunity to move everything forward while Grandma couldn't fight it. Camilla's face flushed with anger, while Kevin stared at the table, shoulders slumped in defeat. And what about the text messages you discovered? Michael asked. Objection. Ms. Winters was on her feet. These messages were obtained without consent. They constitute an invasion of privacy and should be inadmissible. Judge Harriman considered this. I'll allow the witness to testify about conversations she directly observed. The admissibility of the text messages will be determined separately. Abby described what she had seen and heard, the plans for using the proceeds from the house sale, the discussions about pushing Grandma out legally, the calculated timing of everything while Maggie was at her most vulnerable. When it was time for the defense to present their case, Camilla took the stand first, the picture of elegant concern in a conservative navy suit, her expression appropriately somber. We were only trying to help, she testified, her voice catching with practiced emotion. The doctors told us Maggie might not recover, or that she might need long-term care. We wanted to make sure her affairs were in order. And the proceeds from the house sale? Michael asked during cross-examination. Where would those have gone? To a trust for Maggie's care, of course, Camilla replied smoothly. Interesting, Michael commented. Because we have documentation showing that you had already begun making inquiries about home renovation loans using the anticipated proceeds from the sale. Care to explain that? Camilla's composure slipped. Those were preliminary inquiries. Nothing had been decided. When Kevin testified, the contrast was stark. Where Camilla projected polished certainty, Kevin seemed deflated, answering questions in a monotone, unable to meet anyone's eyes, especially his mother's. Did you witness your mother signing the power of attorney document? Michael asked directly. Kevin hesitated, visibly torn. Camilla stared at him intently from her seat, her gaze boring into him. The courtroom fell silent, waiting. No, he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. I didn't. Camilla asked me to sign as a witness, but I wasn't actually there when my mother supposedly signed it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Camilla's face went rigid with fury. Ms. Winters frantically scribbled notes, her strategy crumbling. "Mr. Halberg," Judge Harriman interjected, "are you testifying under oath that you falsely attested to witnessing your mother's signature?" Kevin nodded miserably. "Yes, Your Honor. Camilla said it was just a formality that Mom had agreed to everything verbally before she got so sick. I should have known better." "Yes," the judge agreed coldly. "You should have." The final witness was the notary, a nervous young woman who confirmed that she had notarized the document based on Camilla's assurance that Maggie had signed it willingly, without ever seeing Maggie herself. As closing arguments concluded, Judge Harriman announced she would take the matter under advisement and issue her ruling by the end of the week. The courtroom began to empty, but as Maggie gathered her things, Kevin approached, ignoring Camilla's attempt to pull him away. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I never thought it would go this far." Maggie looked at her son. This man she had raised, this disappointment she still loved despite everything. "Yet you let it happen, Kevin. You stood by and watched." He had no answer for that, and after a moment he turned and followed his wife from the courtroom, leaving Maggie surrounded by the people who had actually stood by her when it mattered. "You did wonderfully," Michael assured her as they made their way out of the courthouse. "Kevin's admission alone may have won the case for us." "How does it feel?" Ruth asked, taking Maggie's arm. "Watching your son finally grow a spine, even if it's years too late." "Bittersweet," Maggie answered, truthfully. Like most important victories in life. The days after the hearing stretched into a peculiar limbo. Life continued. Maggie watered her rescued garden, sorted through what remained of her belongings, and tried to restore some semblance of normalcy to her disrupted home. But everything felt suspended, waiting for Judge Harriman's ruling to determine which way the pendulum would swing. On this particular morning, 3 days after the court appearance, Maggie sat at her kitchen table sipping tea and reading through a stack of cards and letters that had arrived unexpectedly. Word of her situation had spread through the small community of Mapleton, carried by Ruth's indignant recounting to anyone who would listen at the senior center, by Jenny's careful explanations to sympathetic hospital staff, by the courthouse, regulars who had witnessed the drama unfold in courtroom 3. "Listen to this one," Maggie said to Ruth, who was arranging freshly cut peonies in a vase at the counter. "Dear Mrs. Halberg, you may not remember me, but I was in your 3rd grade class in 1982. You taught me long division and how to stand up for myself on the playground. Now I'm a lawyer in Chicago, and I wanted you to know that what happened to you is not just wrong, it's illegal. If you need another legal opinion or just someone to talk to, please call me." And she included her card. Ruth smiled approvingly. "That's Melissa Abernathy, isn't it? Smart girl. Buck teeth." "She had them fixed," Maggie noted, showing Ruth the professional headshot on the business card. "She was always determined." "Like someone else I know," Ruth remarked pointedly, bringing the vase of flowers to the table. "Half the town seems to be rallying around you. Makes you realize how many lives you've touched over the years." It was true. Former students, parents of former students, neighbors past and present, members of Maggie's book club and gardening society, all had reached out in various ways. Mrs. Chen from the corner market had sent over homemade dumplings. Mr. Peterson, who'd bought his house on Maple Street the same year Maggie and Thomas had bought theirs, had stopped by with a bottle of sherry for medicinal purposes. Even the mailman had left a note of encouragement with the day's delivery. The outpouring had been unexpected and deeply moving. After weeks of feeling powerless, Maggie now found herself surrounded by a community that refused to let her fight, alone. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Michael Reyes. "No ruling yet," he said after the initial pleasantries, anticipating her first question. But I do have some news. Camilla's real estate brokerage has dropped her as an agent. What? How do you know? Small town, Michael replied, and Maggie could hear the smile in his voice. The broker called me this morning. Apparently, the testimony about Camilla selling your home without proper authorization didn't sit well with the ethics committee. They've suspended her license pending further investigation. After the call, Maggie shared the news with Ruth, who cackled with vindictive delight. Couldn't happen to a nicer person. I wonder how she's taking it. Maggie didn't have to wonder long. By mid-afternoon, Kevin's car pulled into her driveway. He came alone, shoulders hunched against an imaginary weight, and knocked tentatively on the door he'd once entered without hesitation as a child. "Mom," he said when she answered, his voice strained. "Can we talk?" She led him to the kitchen, where the flowers and cards created a tableau of support he couldn't help but notice. "You've been busy," he observed awkwardly, gesturing to the display. "People have been kind," she corrected, putting on the kettle as she had done thousands of times when he was growing up. Some habits remained, even when everything else changed. Kevin sat at the table, looking out of place in his own childhood home. "Camilla's brokerage suspended her," he said abruptly. "I heard. She's not taking it well." This seemed like an understatement, judging by the weariness in his eyes. "She's talking about countersuing them, fighting the suspension." That would be consistent with her approach to problems, Maggie noted dryly, setting a mug of tea before him. Kevin stared into the steaming liquid as if it might contain answers. "Mom, I don't know how we got here. How things went so wrong." "Don't you?" Maggie asked quietly. The question hung between them, demanding honesty Kevin had avoided for years. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that Maggie felt an unexpected pang of grief for her late husband, who would have been so disappointed by the man their son had become. "Camilla can be persuasive," Kevin finally said. "She has a way of making her ideas seem like the only sensible option." "That's not an explanation, Kevin. It's an excuse." "I know." He looked up, meeting her eyes at last. "I've been making excuses for years, haven't I? For her, for myself. It was just easier to go along, to avoid conflict." "Even when it meant betraying your own mother?" He flinched. "I didn't see it that way. I convinced myself we were helping you, that you'd understand eventually." "Would you have understood if someone tried to sell your home while you were incapacitated?" Maggie challenged. "If someone decided you were too old, too inconvenient, to be allowed to make your own choices?" "No," he admitted quietly. "I wouldn't have." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the old kitchen clock that had kept time through decades of family meals, homework sessions, midnight snacks, and now this painful reckoning. "I don't know if I can forgive this, Kevin," Maggie said finally. "I don't know if I should." "I understand," he replied, and for once she believed he might. "But I needed to come here and tell you I'm sorry. Really sorry, not just because we got caught or because Camilla's facing consequences." "And what about our relationship going forward? What about you and Camilla and me?" Kevin looked down again. "Camilla and I, we're not in a good place right now. After the hearing, after what came out about the POA and my testimony." He swallowed hard. "She feels betrayed, says I threw her under the bus." "Did you?" "I told the truth, finally." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Too little, too late, right?" Before Maggie could respond, the front door opened and Abby's voice called out, "Grandma, it's me." The teenager appeared in the kitchen doorway, stopping short at the sight of her father. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Just talking with Grandma." Kevin replied, his voice softening the way it always did with his daughter. How was school? Fine. Abby's tone was guarded, the easy relationship with her father strained by recent events. She set her backpack down and moved to stand near Maggie, a silent declaration of allegiance that wasn't lost on either adult. Actually, she continued, addressing Maggie, school was pretty great. I told my contemporary issues class about what happened with the house and the court case, and Mr. Lowenstein said it was a perfect real-world example of elder rights for our civil liberties unit. He asked if you might come speak to our class sometime. Maggie blinked in surprise. Speak to your class? About this? Abby nodded eagerly. He says most teenagers don't understand how vulnerable seniors can be to financial exploitation, even from their own families. She cast a pointed glance at her father. He thinks your experience could be really educational. Kevin cleared his throat uncomfortably. Abby, I'm not sure your grandmother wants to relive all this in front of a classroom. Actually, Maggie said slowly, I think I might. The idea of transforming this painful ordeal into something instructive, something that might prevent another elderly person from experiencing the same betrayal, held unexpected appeal. Tell Mr. Lowenstein I'd be happy to consider it, once the legal matters are settled. Abby beamed, squeezing Maggie's shoulder before heading to the refrigerator with the casual entitlement of a teenager in a space where she felt completely at home. Kevin watched her, then stood reluctantly. I should go, he said. Camilla will be wondering where I am. Maggie walked him to the door, where he paused awkwardly on the threshold. Mom, whatever the judge decides, I want you to— No, I won't contest it. If you want to change your will or your end-of-life directives to exclude me, I'd understand that too. The statement was both apology and acknowledgement, perhaps the most honest thing he'd said to her in years. Let's get through the ruling first, Maggie replied, neither accepting nor rejecting the implied request for eventual forgiveness. One day at a time. After he left, she returned to the kitchen to find Abby arranging more cards on the growing display. Dad seemed different, the girl observed cautiously. He did, Maggie agreed. Humbled, perhaps. It doesn't come naturally to him. Do you think he'll ever stand up to Mom properly? Like, make her stop trying to control everything? Maggie considered this. I don't know, sweetheart. People can change, but it usually takes something significant to break lifelong patterns. Like nearly losing your own mother because you let your wife try to steal her house, Abby suggested with the brutal directness of youth. Despite everything, Maggie laughed. Yes, like that. Later that evening, after Abby had gone home, to Kevin's house, not Camilla's, an arrangement that had developed organically in the aftermath of the hearing, Maggie sat on her back porch watching the sunset. The garden needed work, but the roses Thomas had planted were blooming defiantly, their fragrance carrying on the mild spring breeze. The sound of a car door closing made her look up. Jenny was crossing the yard, still in her scrubs, her face alight with excitement. I just drove past the courthouse, she announced without preamble. Michael was coming out. He says Judge Harriman has made her decision. The ruling will be delivered tomorrow morning. Maggie's heart quickened. Tomorrow? Did he give any hint about which way it might go? Jenny shook her head, sitting beside Maggie on the porch swing. He couldn't say, but he seemed optimistic. The two women sat in companionable silence as dusk deepened around them, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue sky. Tomorrow would bring either victory or defeat, justice or disappointment. But sitting here, on the porch Thomas had built, surrounded by the garden they had planted together, Maggie realized that whatever the ruling, she had already won something precious. In the midst of betrayal, she had discovered unexpected alliances, dormant strength, and a community that saw her not as a burden to be managed but as a person worthy of respect and autonomy. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said softly, thank you for being here, for believing me, for fighting alongside me." Jenny smiled, her young face gentle in the fading light. "Some things are worth fighting for, Mrs. Halberg. You taught me that. The waiting would end tomorrow. But tonight, in this moment of suspended time, Maggie felt a peace that transcended the uncertainty. This was her home. This was where she belonged. And no court ruling could change that essential truth. The morning of Judge Harriman's ruling dawned with a clarity that seemed almost deliberate, as if the universe had decided to provide perfect visibility for whatever was to come. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass panels Thomas had installed in the front door decades ago, casting jewel-toned patterns across the entryway floor. Maggie dressed with care, a tailored navy dress she'd worn to church for years, simple pearl earrings Thomas had given her on their 30th anniversary, and sensible shoes that Ruth had insisted were dignified without screaming elderly. Her reflection in the bedroom mirror showed a woman transformed from the frail patient who had awakened in a hospital room to news that her home was being sold. Maggie stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her jaw set with determination. The courthouse seemed different today, less intimidating than it had during the hearing. Michael met her on the steps, briefcase in hand, his expression carefully neutral but with an undercurrent of something that might have been optimism. "Ready?" he asked simply. "More than ready," Maggie replied. "I want this finished." Ruth arrived moments later, followed by Jenny, who had switched shifts to be present. Abby came running up the steps just as they were about to enter, slightly breathless. "Sorry I'm late. The bus was behind schedule." "Should you be here?" Maggie asked, concerned. "It's a school day." "Mr. Lowenstein wrote me an excused absence. He said witnessing the judicial system in action was experiential civics education." Abby grinned. "Plus, I told him I needed to be here for my grandmother." Inside, the scene was familiar. The polished wooden benches, the formal atmosphere, the bailiff preparing for the judge's entrance. What was different was the crowd. Word had spread, and the spectator section was filled with familiar faces. Mrs. Chen from the market, Mr. Peterson from down the street, at least a dozen former students, now adults with graying hair of their own. Even Dr. Sanderson, who had treated Maggie's pneumonia, sat in the back row. On the defendant's side, Kevin sat alone, his expression strained. Camilla was nowhere to be seen. "Where's your mother?" Maggie whispered to Abby. The teenager's expression darkened. "She refused to come. Said the whole thing was a personal vendetta against her and she wouldn't dignify it with her presence." Before Maggie could respond, the bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Harriman entered, her black robes flowing, her expression inscrutable as she took her seat and surveyed the courtroom. "Be seated," she instructed, then adjusted her glasses as she consulted the papers before her. "In the matter of Halberg versus Halberg, regarding the validity of a power of attorney and subsequent actions taken under its claimed authority, I am prepared to issue my ruling." The courtroom fell silent. Maggie felt Ruth's hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly. "Having reviewed all evidence presented, including medical records, witness testimony, and expert opinions, I find the following." Judge Harriman's voice was clear and deliberate, each word distinct. "First, the power of attorney document purportedly signed by Margaret Halberg while hospitalized is hereby declared invalid and unenforceable." A small ripple of response moved through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's continuation. "The evidence clearly establishes that Mrs. Halberg was heavily sedated and medically incapacitated at the time of signing, rendering her unable to provide informed consent. Furthermore, the document was improperly notarized without the notary witnessing the signature, a violation of state law." Maggie felt a weight lifting from her shoulders with each decisive word. Beside her, Michael made notes, though his slight smile suggested he'd anticipated this outcome. "Second, Judge Harriman continued. All actions taken under this invalid power of attorney are likewise nullified. This includes the listing of Mrs. Halberg's home for sale, which is to be immediately withdrawn from the market. Ruth squeezed Maggie's hand again, her face alight with vindication. Third, regarding the personal property removed from Mrs. Halberg's residence, I order a full inventory of all items taken to be submitted to the court within 7 days, and the return of all such items within 30 days. If any items have been sold or otherwise disposed of, fair market value compensation must be provided. Judge Harriman paused, looking directly at Kevin over her reading glasses. Mr. Kevin Halberg, as a signatory witness to a document you have admitted you did not actually witness being signed, you could face serious legal consequences, including potential charges of fraud. While those matters fall outside the scope of today's ruling, I strongly suggest you consult with legal counsel regarding your exposure. Kevin seemed to shrink further into himself, nodding miserably. And finally, the judge continued, regarding Camilla Halberg, who is not present today. Her actions in this matter show a disturbing pattern of calculated exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for review of possible elder abuse charges under state law. I am also ordering that Camilla Halberg may not enter Mrs. Margaret Halberg's property without the express written permission of Mrs. Halberg, to be filed with this court. A murmur rippled through the courtroom at this final pronouncement. Maggie sat very still, processing the full implications. Victory, yes, but also the formal recognition that her son's wife had committed acts serious enough to warrant criminal investigation. In summary, Judge Harriman concluded, the court finds for the plaintiff on all counts. The power of attorney is invalidated, all actions taken under it are nullified, and the defendants are ordered to restore all property and cease any interference with Mrs. Halberg's home and autonomy. She struck her gavel once. This matter is adjudicated. Court is adjourned. The formality of the courtroom dissolved as soon as the judge departed. Ruth hugged Maggie fiercely, whispering, "We did it, old girl!" in her ear. Jenny beamed, squeezing Maggie's shoulder. Abby bounced on her toes with teenage exuberance, saying, "I knew it! I knew we'd win!" Michael shook Maggie's hand, his professional demeanor softening into genuine warmth. "Congratulations, Mrs. Halberg. A complete victory, exactly as we'd hoped." As the initial wave of celebration subsided, Maggie noticed Kevin still sitting alone at the defendant's table, head bowed. Despite everything, she felt a mother's instinctive concern. She made her way over to him, aware of Ruth's disapproving glare following her. "Kevin," she said quietly. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Mom, Congratulations. What will you do now?" she asked, genuinely curious about how her son would navigate the aftermath of this public humiliation and legal defeat. He shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. Camilla's furious about everything, the ruling she expected, her job suspension, the possibility of criminal charges. She says it's all my fault because I cracked on the witness stand." "And what do you think?" Kevin seemed startled by the question, as if unaccustomed to his opinion being sought. I think she's wrong. I think I finally told the truth after years of silence, and that's not something I should be blamed for." Something shifted in Maggie's perception of her son. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first recognition that somewhere beneath the weak-willed man who had enabled Camilla's schemes, there might still exist the boy she had raised to know right from wrong. "It's a start," she said simply. Outside the courthouse, Maggie was startled to find a small crowd waiting. Former neighbors, church friends, parents of students she'd taught decades ago, all had gathered to show support. Someone had made a banner. "Justice for Maggie." Ruth, it seemed, had organized more than just courtroom moral support. "What is all this?" Maggie asked, overwhelmed by the unexpected demonstration. "People care about you," Ruth replied. "When word got out what those two tried to pull, well, Let's just say Mapleton takes care of its own. Mrs. Chen approached, with a bouquet of flowers. We all wanted to be here, she explained, pressing the blooms into Maggie's hands. To show you're not alone. The drive home was quiet, Maggie lost in thought as Ruth, Jenny, and Abby chatted excitedly in Jenny's car. The for sale sign was still planted in her front yard, but Michael had assured her it would be removed by the end of the day. What are you thinking, Grandma? Abby asked, noticing Maggie's silence. I'm thinking about home, Maggie replied truthfully. About what it means to fight for it. About how lucky I am to have had people who helped me fight. Back at the house on Maple Street, Ruth insisted on a small celebration. Jenny made tea while Abby arranged the courthouse flowers in Maggie's best vase. Ruth produced a bottle of champagne, for medicinal purposes naturally, that she'd been saving for just this occasion. As they raised their glasses, tea for Abby, champagne for the adults, Ruth offered a toast. To Maggie Halberg, who taught us all that being old doesn't mean being powerless. And to justice, Jenny added, even when it comes from unexpected places. And to home, Abby concluded, looking around the room that had seen so much of her family's history, good and bad. To staying where you belong. After her friends had departed, promising to return the next day to help with garden cleanup, Maggie walked slowly through her house. The victory felt both enormous and incomplete. She had won the right to stay, but the spaces still bore the scars of Camilla's intrusion. Empty spots where beloved furniture had stood. Walls strangely bare where family photos had been removed. The dining room especially felt hollowed out without Thomas's carefully refinished table and chairs. In the master bedroom, she opened her jewelry box, one of the few personal items Camilla hadn't managed to remove, and took out her wedding ring, which she hadn't worn since Thomas's death. The simple gold band caught the late afternoon light as she slipped it onto her finger. We won, Thomas, she said softly to the empty room. They tried to take our home, but we won. As she stood there, the doorbell rang. Expecting Ruth returning with some forgotten item, Maggie was surprised to find Kevin on her porch, holding a large wrapped object. Mom, he said hesitantly, can I come in, just for a minute? She stepped aside, allowing him entry. In the living room, he carefully set down his burden and began unwrapping it. I saved this, he explained, removing the last of the protective covering. When Camilla was inventorying everything, I hid it in my office closet. It was the portrait Thomas had commissioned for their 40th anniversary. Maggie in her garden, surrounded by the roses he had planted for her, her face alight with joy and purpose. I thought you should have it back right away, Kevin said, not meeting her eyes. It felt like a start. Maggie looked at the painting, then at her son, this flawed, complicated extension of herself and Thomas. The future stretched before them, uncertain, but no longer hostile. 2 weeks after Judge Harriman's ruling, Maggie stood in her dining room, surveying the progress of restoration. The morning light streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the space where Thomas's beloved dining set would soon return. Michael's legal intervention had located most of the furniture at various consignment shops and auction houses, with only a few smaller items truly gone forever. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Outside stood a delivery truck, and 2 men carefully unloaded the oak china cabinet that had held her wedding china for over 4 decades. Watching them navigate the piece through the front door and position it exactly where it had always stood, Maggie felt another piece of her fractured life slot back into place. Just like that? She asked the delivery foreman as he presented the paperwork. No questions about ownership or anything? The man shrugged. Judge's orders. We got the call from the auction house yesterday to pull it from the upcoming sale and return it here. No questions asked. He hesitated. If you don't mind me saying, ma'am, I heard about your case. Not right, what they tried to do to you. Word had spread far beyond Mapleton, it seemed. Maggie's story had taken on a life of its own, circulating through local news and social media as a cautionary tale about elder exploitation and resistance. After signing for the cabinet, Maggie opened it and ran her fingers over the empty shelves. Her Royal Doulton china was still missing, along with the crystal glasses Thomas had inherited from his mother. Michael was confident they would be located, but each passing day made recovery less likely. "Some things can't be replaced," she murmured to herself, closing the cabinet doors. Another knock, this one familiar, Ruth's distinctive 3-tap pattern. "It's gorgeous," Ruth declared, eyeing the restored cabinet. Thomas would be pleased. "Now, are you ready for your big day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Maggie replied, gathering her purse. They drove to Mapleton High School in comfortable silence. Since the verdict, Ruth had appointed herself Maggie's unofficial chauffeur, insisting it was more efficient than both of them driving separately, though Maggie suspected it was her friend's way of keeping a protective eye on her. Abby was waiting at the school entrance, bouncing with nervous energy. "Grandma, Mr. Lowenstein has the whole auditorium set up. There are way more people than we expected." "The whole auditorium?" Maggie stopped short. "I thought this was just for your contemporary issues class." Abby's expression turned sheepish. "Well, it started that way. But then the principal heard about it, and she thought it would be good for the whole senior class. And then some of the elderly advocates from the community asked if they could attend." Ruth chuckled at Maggie's dismayed expression. "Looks like you've become something of a crusader, old girl." Inside, the auditorium was indeed filled, not only with students, but with senior citizens, community leaders, and even a small contingent from the hospital where Maggie had recovered, Jenny among them. Mr. Lowenstein, a earnest young teacher with a bow tie and genuine enthusiasm for civic engagement, rushed to greet them. "Mrs. Halberg, thank you so much for coming. We've structured this as a panel discussion on elder rights and financial autonomy. You'll speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. Is that all right?" Before Maggie could answer, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to find Michael Reyes approaching with a distinguished woman in a crisp pantsuit. "Maggie, this is Diane Hoffman from the State Elder Affairs Commission. She heard about your case and asked to participate in today's discussion." Ms. Hoffman shook Maggie's hand warmly. "Mrs. Halberg, your story has already made an impact. We're seeing increased reports of suspicious power of attorney arrangements and more seniors asking questions about their legal protections. Would you mind if I shared some of these statistics today?" It was overwhelming, this transformation of her private ordeal into a public conversation, her personal pain becoming purposeful. But looking at the eager faces of Abby's classmates, at the seniors who had come seeking information, Maggie felt a responsibility she couldn't ignore. "Of course," she agreed. "Anything that helps others avoid what happened to me." The presentation was more emotional than Maggie had anticipated. Standing at the podium, describing the moment she'd called her own home only to have a realtor answer, she found her voice breaking. But the audience leaned forward, entirely engaged, and their attention gave her strength to continue. "The most dangerous thing about elder exploitation," she explained, "is that it often comes disguised as concern. We're just trying to help. We only want what's best for you. You can't manage alone anymore." These phrases sound caring, but they can mask control and self-interest. She described the systematic dismantling of her life while she lay ill, the forged power of attorney, the house listing, the removal of cherished possessions, and the fight to reclaim her autonomy. She spoke of Jenny's intervention, Ruth's fierce loyalty, Michael's legal expertise, and Abby's courage in standing up for what was right even against her own parents. "But I was lucky," she concluded. "I had people who believed me, who fought alongside me. Many seniors don't. They face these battles alone, and many lose everything: their homes, their independence, their dignity." That's why I'm here today. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone, and knowledge is our best defense. The question and answer session that followed was robust. Students asked about legal protections, about warning signs, about how to help vulnerable grandparents. Seniors in the audience shared their own experiences of children or relatives who had pressured them about homes, finances, or medical decisions. "What about your son?" asked one blunt student toward the end. "Do you still talk to him after what he did?" A hush fell over the auditorium. It was the question everyone had wondered, but no one had dared to ask. Maggie took a deep breath. "My relationship with my son is complicated right now. He participated in something deeply wrong, yet he also ultimately told the truth when it mattered most. Families are never simple, especially in times of crisis. I'm not rushing to forgive, but I'm not closing the door either." After the presentation, as the crowd dispersed, Jenny approached with an unexpected guest, Dr. Sanderson, who had treated Maggie's pneumonia. "Mrs. Halberg, that was powerful," the doctor said. "I've been thinking about your case a lot. The hospital is revising our protocols around power of attorney documentation as a result. No more signatures from heavily sedated patients, no matter what family members claim is urgent." That's wonderful," Maggie replied, genuinely moved that her experience might prevent similar situations. As they were leaving, Abby hugged her fiercely. "I'm so proud of you, Grandma. You were amazing up there." "Thank you for pushing me to do this," Maggie replied. "It was harder than I expected, but important." "Speaking of important things," Ruth interjected as they walked to the car, "don't forget you have the bank appointment tomorrow. Time to get your financial affairs properly sorted." The next morning found Maggie at Mapleton Community Bank, meeting with Jeffrey Wilson, the silver-haired manager who had known her for decades. "I've drafted new financial directives as you requested," he explained, sliding paperwork across his desk. "These specify exactly who has access to your accounts and under what circumstances." Maggie reviewed the documents carefully. No more vague language that could be exploited. No more assumptions of family benevolence. Every contingency spelled out in precise terms. "And the safe deposit box?" she asked. "All set up. Only you have access, with specific succession instructions, in case of your incapacitation or death." Mr. Wilson's expression softened slightly. "Maggie, I've known you since Thomas first opened accounts here. What happened to you? It shouldn't happen to anyone, let alone someone who's been part of this community for so long." After the bank, Maggie had one more stop to make. The law offices of Michael Reyes were housed in a converted Victorian, not unlike her own home. His assistant showed her in immediately. "Everything's prepared as you requested," Michael said, presenting her with a thick folder. "Your new will, advance directives, and power of attorney documents, with Ruth named as your healthcare proxy and financial agent." Maggie nodded, signing, each paper with deliberate strokes. "And the letter to Kevin and Camilla?" Michael handed her a separate envelope. "The legal notification that they have been removed as beneficiaries and decision-makers. Clear, unambiguous, and officially witnessed." It felt both liberating and sorrowful, this formal severing of financial and legal ties with her only child. Not a door permanently closed, as she'd told the student, but certainly one firmly shut for now, with very specific conditions for reopening. "What happens when they receive this?" she asked. "They may contest it, but they won't succeed," Michael assured her. "Your competency is well established, especially after today's public speaking engagement. You're making sound, rational decisions to protect yourself from people who have proven themselves untrustworthy." Back home, Maggie sat in Thomas's armchair, watching the late afternoon light play through the windows. The dining room cabinet gleamed with fresh polish. The dining table and chairs were scheduled for return tomorrow, and the walls once again held the family photos Camilla had removed. The house was healing, piece by piece, and so, perhaps, was she. The doorbell rang. Abby, straight from school, carrying a small potted plant. "It's a peace lily," she explained, setting it on the coffee table. "We're learning about symbolism in English class, and these represent rebirth and renewal. I thought you might like it." "It's perfect," Maggie said, genuinely touched. "How are things at home?" Abby's expression clouded. "Tense. Mom barely speaks to me. Dad tries to make peace, but—" She shrugged, the gesture conveying all the awkwardness of a family fractured by its own actions. "And you? Are you okay?" "I'm better now that I—" "No, you're okay," the girl replied. "Mr. Lowenstein says sometimes doing the right thing doesn't fix everything, but that doesn't make it any less right." "Smart man, you're Mr. Lowenstein," Maggie observed with a smile. "Now, I believe I promised to help you with that history paper." As they settled at the kitchen table, textbooks open between them, Maggie felt a quiet certainty that had been absent in the tumultuous weeks since her hospitalization. Her home remained hers. Her autonomy was protected. Her voice had been heard, not just by a judge, but by her community and beyond. The wounds would heal, though some scars would remain. The peace lily on her coffee table caught the fading light, its white bloom luminous against dark green leaves. Rebirth indeed, hard-won and precious. 1 year to the day after Judge Harriman's ruling, Maggie's garden blazed with summer color. The rosebushes Thomas had planted decades ago framed the back porch in crimson and gold, while the vegetable garden, expanded since last year, promised a bountiful harvest. Bees hummed contentedly among the lavender, and birds flitted between the birdbath and the old oak tree that had witnessed nearly half a century of the Halberg family's life. Maggie moved through the garden with practiced efficiency, her breathing clear and strong with no hint of the pneumonia that had nearly cost her everything. She was trimming back the climbing roses when Ruth appeared at the garden gate. "You're going to work yourself into another hospital stay if you don't take a break," Ruth called, carrying a pitcher of lemonade and 2 glasses. "It's 90 degrees out here." "I'm almost finished," Maggie replied, but she set her pruning shears aside and joined Ruth on the shaded porch. "Besides, the garden helps me think." "Thinking about today's gathering?" Ruth asked perceptively. Pouring the lemonade, Maggie nodded. The past year had brought many changes, both to her home and to her life. The elder rights advocacy group she'd helped establish with Ms. Hoffman from the State Commission had quickly grown from a small local initiative to a county-wide resource. Maggie now spoke regularly at senior centers and community events about protecting autonomy and recognizing exploitation. But today's gathering was different, more personal, and far more complicated. The kitchen phone rang, and Maggie went to answer it, returning moments later with a slight frown. "Kevin?" Ruth guessed. "Confirming they'll be here at 4, Maggie said, resuming her seat. He sounded nervous. "He should be," Ruth muttered, ever the protective friend. "It's a lot of nerve, asking to come back here after everything." "It was Abby's idea," Maggie reminded her, "and I agreed to it. The decision to allow Kevin and Camilla back into her home, even just for a closely supervised visit, had not been easy. After the court ruling, contact had been minimal and strained. Kevin called occasionally, his conversations awkward but persistent. Camilla, faced with professional disgrace after her real estate license was permanently revoked following the ethics investigation, had maintained a cold distance, communicating only through terse messages delivered by Kevin. Abby had become the unexpected bridge, dividing her time between her parents' home and her grandmother's. It was during one of their weekly dinners that she had proposed today's gathering. "It's been a year, Grandma," she had said. "Maybe it's time to at least talk. Not to forgive and forget, just to acknowledge what happened and see if there's any way forward." Maggie had agreed, partly for Abby's sake and partly because, as she approached 75, she was increasingly aware of time's limited nature. Some wounds needed to heal, even if the scars remained. Just promise me you won't let that woman manipulate you again, Ruth said now, interrupting Maggie's thoughts. I think we're well past that, Maggie replied. Besides, you and Jenny will be here as my reinforcements. Damn right we will, Ruth declared, raising her lemonade glass in a toast. To unburned bridges but fireproof houses. By 4 o'clock, the house was ready. Jenny had arrived early to help prepare a light meal, and Michael Reyes had stopped by briefly to deliver a housewarming gift, a framed copy of the court ruling, now hanging discreetly in Maggie's study. Just a reminder, he'd said with a wink, of battles won. When the doorbell rang, it was Abby who answered, her role as mediator already in play. She ushered in her parents, both looking distinctly uncomfortable. Kevin carried a bouquet of store-bought flowers, while Camilla clutched a small gift bag as if it were a shield. Mom, Kevin said, offering the flowers awkwardly. Thank you for having us. Welcome, Maggie replied, accepting the bouquet with deliberate grace. Her gaze shifted to Camilla, whose perfect appearance remained unchanged, though something in her eyes seemed dimmer, less certain. Camilla. Margaret, Camilla responded stiffly, extending the gift bag. A small token for your hospitality. Inside was an antique porcelain teacup, hand-painted with roses that matched those in Maggie's garden. It was, Maggie had to admit, unexpectedly thoughtful, either a genuine peace offering or a very calculated one. With Camilla, it was always difficult to tell. The gathering moved to the dining room, now fully restored with Thomas's table and chairs, the china cabinet displaying the wedding china that had eventually been recovered from a dealer in Chicago. Maggie had deliberately chosen this setting, a silent reminder of what had been taken and reclaimed. Conversation began haltingly, focused on safe topics, Abby's college plans, the uncommonly warm weather, the remodeling of Main Street downtown. Jenny and Ruth maintained a protective presence, their watchful eyes never leaving Camilla, who seemed determined to project polite interest despite the obvious tension. Eventually, as dessert was served, Kevin cleared his throat. Mom, I know this isn't easy. Having us here after? He trailed off, struggling to name the betrayal directly. After you tried to sell my home while I was hospitalized? Maggie supplied, her voice calm but unflinching. After you forged documents and removed my belongings without permission? After you betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible? The room fell silent. Kevin stared at his plate, while Camilla's perfect posture stiffened further. Abby looked from one adult to another, her young face tense with hope and worry. Yes, Kevin finally said, meeting his mother's gaze. After all that, I've spent this past year thinking about what happened, what I allowed to happen. I can't undo it. I can't even fully explain it except to say that I was weak, and I failed you completely. It was the most direct acknowledgement he had made, and Maggie felt its impact like a physical wave. Before she could respond, Camilla spoke, her voice tight with controlled emotion. What Kevin is trying to say is that we both recognize the gravity of our actions. She set her napkin down precisely. I've lost my career over this. My professional reputation is destroyed. The criminal charges were only dropped because you declined to pursue them. Are you suggesting you've suffered enough? Ruth interjected sharply. Because from where I sit. No, Camilla interrupted, surprising everyone. No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm simply stating facts. What we did, what I orchestrated and Kevin enabled, was wrong, legally and morally wrong. The admission hung in the air, unexpected and unprecedented coming from Camilla, who had spent a lifetime avoiding accountability. Why now? Maggie asked. After a year of silence and minimal contact, why this admission today? Kevin and Camilla exchanged glances. It was Abby who answered. Because I told them I wouldn't include them in my life if they couldn't acknowledge What they did to you, she said quietly. I love them, but I can't pretend what happened was okay, or that it didn't matter. Maggie looked at her granddaughter with newfound respect. The girl had grown so much in the past year, showing a moral courage that put many adults to shame. We've also been in counseling, Kevin added, separately and together, trying to understand how things went so wrong. And have you? Understood it? Jenny asked, speaking for the first time. Camilla's perfect composure cracked slightly. I've understood that I've spent my life valuing appearances over substance, control over connection. The house, it was never really about the house. It was about asserting control when everything felt chaotic. She met Maggie's eyes directly. That doesn't excuse it. Nothing does. But it's the truth, for whatever it's worth. The conversation that followed was neither easy nor complete. Old wounds were acknowledged, if not fully healed. Boundaries were established. Kevin and Camilla would not have keys to Maggie's home, would visit only by invitation, would respect her autonomy in all matters. Trust, if it ever returned, would be earned slowly, through consistent actions rather than words. As they prepared to leave, Kevin lingered in the entryway while Camilla and Abby waited in the car. The garden looks beautiful, he said softly. Just like when Dad was alive. I've had more time for it this year, Maggie replied. It helps me think. Do you think... Kevin hesitated. Do you think we could ever get back some of what we lost? Maggie considered her son, this flawed, struggling man who shared her blood and Thomas's name. Not what we lost, no. That's gone. But perhaps something new, something more honest. It would take time. I have time, Kevin said, if you do. After they left, Maggie, Ruth, and Jenny sat in the garden as evening approached, dissecting the visit and its implications. Do you believe them? Jenny asked. About understanding what they did. Camilla? I'm not sure she's capable of full understanding, Ruth opined. But she's had her wings clipped, and that counts for something. And Kevin? Maggie mused. I think he's trying. It's not enough, but it's something. As twilight deepened into night, Ruth and Jenny departed with promises to call tomorrow. Maggie remained in the garden, watching as stars appeared above the old oak tree. She thought about the year that had passed, the battles won, the relationships altered or strengthened, the newfound purpose she'd discovered in advocating for others. The house behind her stood solid and unchanged, its windows glowing warmly against the gathering darkness. More than walls and a roof, it remained what it had always been, a repository of memories, a shelter from storms both literal and metaphorical, a testament to a life well lived. Walking back inside, Maggie paused in each room, acknowledging the journey of loss and reclamation that had transformed both the space and herself. In the dining room, Thomas's table gleamed in the soft light. In the living room, family photos once again lined the mantel. In the kitchen, the copper pots hung in their rightful place, home, still hers, always hers. As she prepared for bed, Maggie thought about the elder rights group meeting scheduled for tomorrow, where another dozen seniors would learn how to protect themselves from the fate she had narrowly escaped. She thought about Abby, standing firm, in her principles despite the cost. She thought about Jenny, whose compassion had sparked the resistance that saved everything. And she thought with cautious hope about the possibility of a new relationship with Kevin, not built on blind trust or obligation, but on hard-earned wisdom and clear-eyed acceptance of both his limitations and his capacity for growth. The pneumonia that had nearly cost Maggie her home had paradoxically given her a new life, one with sharper boundaries, deeper connections, and a voice that carried beyond the walls of 412 Maple Street into the wider world, where other elders faced similar threats to their autonomy and dignity. Not bad for 75, she murmured to herself, settling into bed in the room she had shared with Thomas for 40 years, in the house that remained, against all odds and attempts, indisputably hers. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.